Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm Smita Fokia from UNIDO. I would very much like to thank IRENA for hosting us today for this session on green hydrogen policy making in developing countries. To kick off the session, I'd like to introduce Mr. Gunther Beger, Managing Director of UNIDO, to give some welcome remarks. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Smita. And first of all, would like to thank Ute and IRENA for hosting us today, and the colleagues from IDOS. And I'm very happy to be here and to discuss green hydrogen policy making in developing countries. Green hydrogen, you know, holds vast untapped potential for driving new industrial development in the global south, while transforming energy systems to net zero. Hydrogen-based value chain development, often wide-ranging opportunities to producer countries, economic diversification, job creation, skills development, as well as energy security. Only 23 sizable green hydrogen projects were operational as at 2022, and to deploy the technology at scale, of course, several challenges need to be addressed. There's a huge financial gap, first of all, for hydrogen production facilities, electrolyzers, and infrastructure. About $50 billion to achieve a break-even in prices between green and gray hydrogen. So innovative solutions for de-risking investment are required. And policy instruments and standards are needed to promote an international market that matches demand and supply to effectively distribute clean hydrogen. If these challenges are overcome, green hydrogen can pave the way for net zero industrial development. But we need to make sure that this transition is a just one. And that is, of course, especially for us who are working with 172 countries, and most of them developing countries, a very important issue. And contributing to this aim, UNIDO initiated its global program for hydrogen in industry to accelerate the global production and application of green hydrogen in developing countries. Aligned with UNIDO's commitment to achieve progress by innovation, the program provides guidance in shaping market policies, standards, skills, financing instrument, and innovation. The programs promotes tangible projects to accelerate the local uptake of green hydrogen in industries of developing countries. This is exemplified by the Policy Toolkit, which is launched here today. And I'm very happy about the cooperation with our partners from IRENA and IDOS that produced this extensive and insightful report. Ladies and gentlemen, to make green hydrogen a success for developing countries, we need to work together and to share our knowledge and resources. Today we celebrate the launch of a policy toolkit for green hydrogen in developing countries, which embodies such knowledge sharing in collaboration spirit. So I'm very looking forward to a discussion which addresses challenges and solutions, very important solutions for inclusive, sustainable industrial development based on hydrogen value chain. So I wish us a fruitful session, and once more, thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Günther, and welcome to the Global Renewables Hub. I'm Ute Collier. I'm the acting director of the Knowledge, Policy and Finance Center. I've said that so many times during the last week that I'm now in my last event. I'm struggling to say it, which is kind of funny. Okay, so for us at IRENA, I mean, we recognize the importance of hydrogen, of course. If you look at our World Energy Transitions Outlook, it's quite clear about the necessity to use hydrogen, to expand hydrogen, and of course, mostly green hydrogen, for achieving the pathway to 1.5 degrees, especially to decarbonize the hard-to-abate sectors. However, we also do a lot of work, of course, on the just and inclusive energy transition. And you may have seen we just published the second volume of the World Energy Transitions Outlook a couple of weeks ago, which looked at the socio-economic impacts of the transition of a 1.5 degrees pathway. And there is a lot of potential for jobs creation, for increase in GDP, for increase in welfare. But to achieve this, of course, we have to have effective policy. It won't just happen by itself. And we need to make sure that this happens everywhere and not just in the developed world. So I can't quite compete actually with UNIDO. We have 168 member states, including the EU, but also many developing countries. So we've become increasingly interested to see what the scope is for hydrogen in developing countries to, you know, as we just heard, to help industrial development, to help the welfare creation in the part of the world that's being left behind. So we were very pleased to collaborate with UNIDO and IDOS on this policy toolkit, and we do hope it's helpful for policymakers. We had many discussions here at the event, here at the COP as well, and I think there is a lot more recognition than a couple of years ago that, you know, to get the full benefits from the energy transition and from the green hydrogen development, we have to act now to ensure that, especially in the developing world, it's done in a way that, you know, overcomes the many challenges these countries have, the lack of development. We need to think of how it links in with the lack of energy access we see in many countries. You know, for me, that is a really crucial thing. You know, we wouldn't want to see a hydrogen project and then no benefits trickling down, and elsewhere in the country we still have like hundreds of thousands or millions of people in one country without energy access. So lots of challenges, and we do hope that our report is one of the important tools that helps policymakers to think about it. So without further ado, I'd now like to pass over to give the presentations. Smita? Oh no, okay, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, a very warm welcome from my side. My name is Rita Strohmeier. I'm working at the German Institute of Development and Sustainability, IDOS, and I'm very happy to present now the framing of the report before my colleague Smita from UNIDO will go more into detail regarding the content of the report. So let me just jump right into our presentation. As you all know, green hydrogen holds a great potential for decarbonizing the economy, for transforming especially emission-intensive sectors, the hard-to-abate sectors such as the heavy industry, steel, chemical, cement, and also specific subsectors of transport like maritime shipping and aviation. So where are we standing now with this new hype? Over 45 countries, have published their national hydrogen strategies and roadmaps. And while in the beginning, most of these countries were from the global north, and the initiative was very much spearheaded by Japan and by the European Union, we see now an increasing number of countries from the global south that are developing their national hydrogen strategies and roadmaps. And most of them, of course, are renewable-rich countries, and most of them have also ambitions to export hydrogen and derivatives. But, and there is coming a big but, not only. So if you look at the national hydrogen strategies of developing countries, many of these already have a very clear understanding of how hydrogen can contribute to decarbonizing their transport sector, to creating local value, to giving new job opportunities, to industrial diversification, to increasing international competitiveness when it comes to the global trade of green goods. And so we don't need to convince people about the significance of hydrogen, but what is needed is support. And this is where I think our report comes in. First, in terms of advocacy of the new narrative. So we try to reinforce this shift in focus from from hydrogen being primarily an export commodity from developing countries to its potential for decarbonizing their economies and societies. And based on this reframing of narrative, we developed a policy toolkit that should help countries, and in particular developing countries, unleash the various opportunities that you can find in along the entire hydrogen value chain. When it comes to green hydrogen production, you know this is technologically very complex. It is very capital intensive. It entails strong economies of scale, and with this, of course, comes the risk that we produce technology enclaves that are more or less driven by foreign direct investments and that don't really have this kind of long-term sustainable benefits that we would like to initiate in developing countries. For that reason, we identified in the report several economic activity clusters, so windows of opportunities that can be built around green hydrogen production itself, starting upstream with the local manufacturing of renewable energy technology and equipment, solar panels, wind turbines, then the conversion of green hydrogen into power to X like ammonia, methanol, synthetic fuels, the build-up of new mobility industries around fuel cells and retrofitting of cars, the decarbonization of and the build-up of new green industries like green steel, green ammonia, and this should possibly or hopefully also attract FDI into these emerging new industries. So we have this renewable pool effect where it comes to relocation of industries from the relatively energy-poor global north to the renewables-rich global south. So we do have a lot of opportunities, but these benefits are very hard to materialize. They don't come equally over for all the countries. We have very big context specificities like institutional settings, access to technology, and so on and so forth. And even more, we have these kind of universal challenges that are still inherent in global hydrogen, in the global hydrogen economy. And some of them were already mentioned. One of the biggest is, of course, the lack of credible demand. So you have you lack these offtake agreements that are necessary for pushing the market formation. You have a lot of technical and infrastructural uncertainties. You have a lack of clear political signals, missing regulatory frameworks. You have a lot of uncertainty still inherent in international trade. You don't know how to ship big amounts of hydrogen in an environmentally friendly way. You don't know where the global market price will be in 2050, which the countries need to compete at. And there are so many more challenges. And in light of these challenges, we propose in the report a clover approach to hydrogen development. This clover approach is a framework that basically constitutes of 4 key elements that countries are, in our opinion, well advised to consider when they are developing the hydrogen strategy. That is, first, a dual approach, meaning prioritizing domestic use over export, given the many uncertainties that are still inherent in international trade. The second is an integrated approach, so align green hydrogen development with achieving the energy, first the national energy transition and other development goals. It's important to say that countries should not only count on these linkage effects that can be generated through these very different economic activities along the hydrogen value chain. It is important that they actively seek and explore new benefit-sharing options and weave them into the development of their strategies. Then third, a gradual approach. That means that it is beneficial to start with smaller to medium-sized projects in order to allow for technological learning. Many of these countries do not have the necessary industrial base or technology base, and with this you can build up capabilities. And last but not least, a phased approach. So develop green hydrogen in stages, kind of fillet the long-term vision of your hydrogen sector into more digestible parts. Start with short-term targets and so on and so forth. And this framework is not like originally developed by us. This is the synthesis of what we've seen in our country studies, of what we have been talking with experts and stakeholders. And this framework shines through all the rest of our report that Smita will now introduce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to see a full room here today. Thank you for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. Shows lots of interest in the topic. I have to say that working on this report with IRENA and IDOS was extremely pleasant. We went into so many topics and explored them together, and I hope that we did it justice and that you will enjoy reading it as much as we enjoyed writing it. So the report goes along the value chain of the green hydrogen, as Rita has just mentioned. We will start with how the hydrogen technology is produced, then cover some policy intervention areas, some policy instruments itself on each of those topics. So first of all, the backward linkages of the technology that's being used, the hydrogen production, renewable energy production, then the storage, transport, distribution, and the production of the hydrogen itself, and looking at downstream applications, and finally the international cooperation that's required. So first of all, fostering inclusive technological advancement and sustainable energy generation. We need the technologies, right? Countries, currently the technology is extremely concentrated from a few producers, a few suppliers. So does that mean there's a risk for energy security? Potentially. So how do we get out of that? Do we recommend countries that have the technological capacity to also go into technology manufacturing? Why not? If you have the capacity, please do so. And then the report also looks into local content requirements and how this can boost domestic manufacturing. Not always possible, but under some circumstances doable. And then how to integrate. That's the thing with hydrogen, because it really affects all aspects of life. Countries really need to align all types of strategies and policies that they have in the country. We've already talked about the energy policy, the energy strategy. We've touched on the industrial strategy, but now we're going into innovation strategy. So these needs to be linked, and later we will see education strategy as well. So it all fits in together. Then, of course, we need large-scale green hydrogen production. That has an impact on water. We need a lot of water to produce it, and lots of space also to generate the renewable energy. And that has impact on agriculture, water, and food security, which needs to be managed. That's part of that just transition, that we make sure it's all, it doesn't have any negative impact on anyone else. So some policy recommendations are also included on that topic to achieve that comprehensive environmental and social overall positive aspect. So then the next chapter is going downstream from the production of the hydrogen, is looking at, now that you have the hydrogen, what do you do with it? Can you use it locally? Can you create a market for it locally that would demand, that create the demand for the green hydrogen or the green goods? So there we touch upon regulatory clarity and stability. Investors do not like policies which change from one day to another. They need that long-term stability in order to invest, and again, some ideas are provided. How do we provide the support for early movers in terms of reducing risk, the investment risk that they're taking in the first instance as the first mover? How can public support help with that, and in what type of financial mechanisms? Then we have the demand creation policies themselves. How can certification help? The hydrogen itself, the green hydrogen, needs to be certified, but not only that, the goods that's produced from it, say you produce green steel, that needs to also be certified. Then you can use other instruments such as premiums and quotas to gradually get the market to take up that hydrogen. Value chain integration and coordination. Green hydrogen value chain is a very, very complex one. So we've seen how long it is. Several actors are involved. Coordinating all of them is a challenge. So how do you set up the public-private partnership, the industrial clusters to get all some end users together with producer of a hydrogen. This is the concept of the green hydrogen industrial cluster model that we have. And also, so many actors, how do they get to share knowledge and information, and how do we have ideally a centralized platform, a one-stop shop for all those stakeholders. Next chapter then looks at the planning of infrastructure. You have produced the hydrogen, you need to transport it from A to B to production source to usage point of use. So again, focus on long-term strategies, that how do we look into privately owned infrastructure versus open access systems, PPPs again, what kind of storage solution, where should projects be located, and here, so before I mentioned the different strategies that a country needs to look into, here we're also looking at the infrastructure policy of a country and land use. So again, we need to limit or avoid any impact on local communities, because, as I mentioned before, the infrastructure for green hydrogen takes up space. And if you plan to export, as Rita mentioned before, that dual approach of using locally and exporting, you need to see if you will be doing that by pipelines, by maritime transport, what kind of green hydrogen carrier you'll be using, where you will store it, if you need, what else you need. Then securing the investment, are we looking at building new infrastructure, pipelines, ports, etc., or are we looking at retrofitting them? There's some guidance on that. And what kind of financing options is possible? We have touched on public procurement, the de-risking measures, PPPs, and regulated asset-based models. Last chapter looks at the global partnerships, international collaboration, and financing strategies. We need multilateral cooperation for scaling up. It will not happen without it, whether it's to do with the science, the R&D part of it, or whether it's to do with getting a common regulatory framework for standards, for example, and certification. Yes, there's different workspace happening, and many actors, as you see, are involved. And yeah, it's a moving space, so that Rita mentioned before that more than 45 countries have signed MOUs. There are indeed many multilateral cooperation that is being scaled up, whether it's for the trade of hydrogen itself, but also for technology, R&D, climate financing, and that trade that we mentioned before. Yeah, this one shows a bit the existing same figure, same text, but different figure on bilateral MOUs that exist between different countries. You see very strongly link the importing countries that are having lots of MOUs signed with the exporting countries. On that note, I would say thank you very much for your attention and pass on to Emanuele now for the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Does it? Yes, okay. Thank you so much, Smita. It was a pleasure to work with you on this report. It's going to be online very soon. And now I invite some great experts to discuss about this topic. So Frank, Nancy, Nadia, if you can please join me. Does that microphone work? Otherwise, we are going to pass this one. Yes.
You didn't pay the bill.
I think not, but we can be more efficient in this way with only one microphone instead of. And in any case, I think everyone can listen to us. It's possible. Oh yes. So I will ask you to introduce yourself together with the first question. Great. So it's COP is finishing. It's after 2 weeks, and there has been a lot of discussion about hydrogen as a new energy carrier, the energy carrier of the future. It's not a new thing. Also in the past, I think things are changing, but there is a lot of excitement, in particular in the region. So what's your take on this evolving atmosphere? And while you're answering, please feel free to introduce yourself and explain who you are today. You can start. And then.
Hi, my name is Frank Wouters. I used to be with IRENA. Now I'm helping the team at UNIDO. I've been working on green hydrogen or clean hydrogen now since 2016. So it feels a lot like renewables 20 years ago. 2 months ago I was in at the Power to X conference in Morocco, and the minister looked at us in the audience and said, half of you are preaching and the other half are still somewhat on the fence. I'm a preacher. I've been preaching this stuff for a long time. And the idea today is also to get half of you that are on the fence, maybe unsure about hydrogen, to get you over the fence and at least give you some more data and information on it. Sorry, what was the question again?
How do you feel about the evolution?
How do I feel about hydrogen? So one of the things at COP, yes. Well, obviously, I mean, it's a special topic, right? I mean, we had a special COP advisor, Daria, from the Hydrogen Council. There was a Hydrogen Day, so there's a growing recognition that within, the energy space and the clean energy space, hydrogen as an energy carrier is important. And I do think that it requires a little bit more thinking and also a little bit more preaching. One of the things that we need to realize and get our heads around is that if you, for example, look at the overall global primary energy demand, per year it's 167,000 terawatt hours. That is a big number. Maybe it doesn't tell you much, but if you then look at how much is in storage, that is 142. So 85% of all the energy that we're using every year is stored somewhere. And 1/3 of that is oil tanks, and they're distributed. They're in your gas station, they're on tankers, but also big oil farms, heaps of coal, and then of course gas, so natural gas storage underneath. Electricity you cannot store. The definition of electricity is a flow of electrons. So if you want to have electricity at another point in time, you have to convert it into something else. And one of the things that hydrogen is really good at is being stored loss-free. So a lot of people get upset and get confused by thermodynamics. Oh, we have losses. I have electricity, that's great. We know how to do that, that's now cheap. let's use it directly as much as we can, but we also have to realize that 20% of all final energy is electricity. 80% are the molecules, and all of those molecules are currently carbon. So that is where hydrogen is. So it's a much, much bigger thing. 85% is in storage. That you cannot do with electricity. You have to do something else. And that's where I think hydrogen is one of those things. It's a molecule that you can transport easily, you can store it, etc. Don't get upset and confused by the efficiency and the losses. And obviously we have to work on the cost, but if you look at it from a distance, there is very little alternatives that we have in terms of how you manage a global energy system. It's biomass, not infinitely scalable. Carbon, where we have to capture the CO2, that is going to go down drastically, and then there is hydrogen. So I think it's much bigger.
Nancy, what's your take on the evolution of hydrogen at COP?
So my name's Nancy Sage. I'm the Chief Climate Change Expert of the European Investment Bank, and thank you very much for inviting us to be here today. I have a slightly different take on hydrogen. I think the way that we're looking at it in EIB is really the way that it's going to be absolutely essential for many of the hard-to-abate industrial sectors, absolutely critical. We see it as a huge opportunity in developing countries, absolutely key. We think that research and development and rolling out of not only what is needed for hydrogen, but also the products, as was mentioned in the studies, in domestic markets is absolutely critical. It actually can be part of the, if you like, new industrial revolution in developing countries. So I think this idea of really focusing on where it can be utilized nearer to where it's made and actually facilitate sort of new markets in those developing countries, as opposed to focusing on the international sort of export side. I think that's a very powerful message from the report that we saw. We are doing a lot of investments, obviously in not only the renewables, but also then the plants and the infrastructure that's needed in Europe, and we've done a number of projects also in some other developing countries where we work. I think the thing that I would want to add is we see a couple of other things that really have to be thought about. One, I know everybody's aware of it, and it was mentioned in the study. We really have to think how it provides a benefit to the whole of the country, where the renewables are, and that it is not, in the end, facilitating a green supply chain for developed countries and not actually helping the country where the sun is shining and the wind is blowing to actually have their development. I think that seems absolutely key. If we get that balance right, that's really, really important. The second thing for us is Paris alignment. For us means both the temperature goal and the resilience goal. And when we look at the physical infrastructure, we need to think about, and the industrial plants, we need to think about them being resilient to climate change impacts. We're talking about infrastructure that has to be there for a while, and it's very important that it's safe and continues to operate. So making it resilient to climate change impacts, whether it's changing temperatures or whether it's changing storms, or even in certain situations there might be other climate change issues that need to be looked at. And the last thing is the just transition issue, which was also mentioned by one of the earlier speakers. Is absolutely essential that climate change is inherently unjust. And what we're trying to do when we here at the COP is talk about a just transition. We're trying to make sure that whatever we do to address the temperature goals and the resilience goals makes the inequalities less, doesn't make them worse, and doesn't worsen fragility and vulnerability in countries. So ensuring that the just transition and the opportunities for livelihoods and jobs in these new green industries is critical as well for us in looking at the hydrogen and sector and all of the supply chain that goes with it.
Thank you, dear organizers. Thank you very much for inviting me here. This is a great honor and pleasure for me to be here. My name is Nadia Nadezhda Komendantova. I am Senior Research Scholar at International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis. Difficult name, abbreviation is IASA, which is in Austria, and this is an international organization which is supported by National Academies of Science of 24 countries. At IASA, I am leading the group which is called Cooperation and Transformative Governance, and we look at different transitions and develop models for scenario planning, for so-called participatory scenario planning, but also for negotiations, for calculating the cost of transitions, impacts. And we look at different kinds of transitions, but energy transition is in the key of our research interests. So we have 34 research scholars, mainly mathematicians, but also policy analysts and behavioral economists. And my takeaway from this discussion about hydrogen at COP, actually, I think I made 3 points for me. So the first, I think that this was an absolute milestone, huge milestone for hydrogen development. First, because we saw presentation of a lot of projects, important ideas were taken here. Then also we had a lot of events, and I'm really amazed how you at IRENA, but also at UNIDO and the team of Petra and Smita, how many events we managed to put together and highlight this topic from energy transition based on deployment of hydrogen from different perspectives. And the third one, I am really pleased to see this discussion from so holistic perspectives. My professional background is I started from Desert Tech, so we had different events on Desert Tech, who understanding Desert Tech, looking at the drivers of its deployment. And I remember in the policy area, it was always discussion on financial factors, what kind of business models we need, de-risking, what kind of policy drivers, regulations. At that time, I remember Professor Savakul published a study analyzing energy systems, and with which kinds of factors they are talking, social factors were addressed only by 3%. So actually the topics like social acceptance, public acceptance, engagement, ownership of transition were growing since that time. And here I saw a lot of discussions that when we talk about hydrogen, we speak, yes, about financial factors, models, policy drivers, regulations, but also about community engagement, about acceptance, about the needs of people on the ground. So this, I think, was really just amazing, I would say.
Thank you all for giving your perspective. Starting with Frank, I have a question, because you say that you have quite some years of experience. You've been in the renewable energy sector for a while, so for sure you have experienced, like many in the audience, me included, some of the hydrogen waves of interest. It's not the first time we're talking about hydrogen, let's be honest. Do you think, first, that this time is different? And the second question is, if you believe that, like we presented today, there is a shift in the hydrogen discussion toward local usage in developing countries, industrialization of developing countries, rather than international trade, and would this discussion actually affect real-world development, or is just a hope that we have?
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, what's different? Because indeed, hydrogen has gone through a number of hypes. It started actually in 1973 with the first oil price crisis, and then I think George Bush did another boost to fuel cells, etc. And it hasn't really stuck so far. What's different now is that we've actually cracked the nut on renewables. So renewable electricity is now cost effective. It's sort of the default option if you need a green electron. The cheapest thing to do in most places on the planet is solar or wind. And that changes everything, which doesn't mean that hydrogen is cheap yet, because we haven't started making green hydrogen, but at least the conditions are there. And because we've gone through this learning curve of green electricity, we now see that we can go through the same thing for hydrogen. So that will become cheap. We'll see the same effect that we've seen with smartphones, with solar panels, we will see with hydrogen. So that's something that I think that's why it's different now. Secondly, also, we're in an absolute global climate crisis. And as I said before, there's very few things that can actually make that work. And hydrogen, the advantage it has in seasonal and long-term storage and ease of transport, etc., which are all much more difficult and more expensive with direct electricity. That's where hydrogen comes in. In terms of, if you then look at export versus local use, I was at the Ammonia Energy Association meeting in Atlanta 2 weeks ago. There was somebody that showed the 20 clean ammonia projects in the United States, and all of them, 20 of them, were exporting ammonia. There is not a single project that I see in developing countries at scale, whether it's even Saudi Arabia, Mauritania, Namibia, they're all for export first. I mean, that is, at the moment, I think the financial reality. Part of what we need to do is, we can talk about local use with all the benefits that we've seen in the report, but the question is who's going to pay for that and why? And that, I think, is still something that we need to think probably a little bit harder about. We had some very earnest discussions last week. You know, there was the presidential advisor to the president of Namibia said it very clearly. Europe, with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, you know, obviously we understand why they do it. They don't want to disadvantage their local industry, so then you put that tax at the border to, you know, to make it fair, at least for the European industry. But then what Europe is doing, okay, we get this tax money, then we're going to put it in an innovation fund to increase the competitiveness of European industry, which is already way more competitive than the industry in developing countries. So then you have a gap that's there now, and you're going to make that gap wider. I mean, we understand why Europe is doing this. It's self-interest, but it's not fair, and it's not helping. So in that sense, you know, if we're looking at, okay, local use of hydrogen in developing countries, let people like Europe pay for that. Instead of taking that money, innovate in Europe, share it with the people that can actually then also, you know, become somewhat of a competitor. But this is, I think, the bigger discussion is really who's going to pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. And since we're talking about who can pay for it, it's good that we have a representative of a multilateral bank. And we know that a big problem for achieving FID is having an offtake agreement. Only 2% of the project, less than 2% of the projects nowadays have an offtake agreement. This is a problem to achieve finance. And so the question is, how can you, maybe the development bank like AIB, stimulate demand creation, not hydrogen supply for industries that can use hydrogen like steel, ammonia, etc., and support green industrialization in developing countries if monies are not flowing toward them? Can you help them?
Yes, absolutely. I think that it's important to see that's needed. You know, you really have to build a strategic approach, I think, with public-private partnerships to help sort of drive that and make the market more robust, and so that there can be more certainty in terms of contracts, longer-term contracts, and so on, so that can then justify the investments in the infrastructure that's needed. I would just say, however, that I think that we need to also, part of the job in a way of an MDB rather than a commercial bank is to look at what are the risks, if you like, in all of this as well, and make sure that we are not indebting developing countries for something that might become a stranded asset. So we're talking about pretty expensive infrastructure and transport systems, which was mentioned. So there are other emerging technologies for producing green hydrogen. Now, I don't think anybody in the room knows quite how those are going to take off, and I mean, in 10 years' time, maybe we'll look back and say, that turned out to be an absolute winner. What I think is great about using the renewable energy is that if in the end of the day, that doesn't turn out to be the way the country in the end wants to develop, or whether in the end other technologies, and perhaps the question around the EU border tax actually changes the way the market develops, it still means that the country concerned has built renewable energy. And so what I think is really important, as one of the questions that we're asking ourselves, is can the system be flexible? So that if in the end it turns out that the country wants to take a different path, I take your point that at the moment that's not what everybody's doing. They're all exporting, but it could be. The point is that the renewable energy is also going to be providing energy. It's going to be providing access to energy in the country. And so I really think that keeping that flexibility is there, because I think what I'm afraid of a little bit is that there'll be big investment in infrastructure, and then perhaps the potential market disappears because another way has been found of doing it, which is cheaper. I would not want those developing countries to then have a lot of infrastructure which is not usable and is still a debt. On the other hand, they will definitely have renewable energy. So I think keeping in mind a flexible use of the system for hydrogen and for power is critical. Because to be perfectly honest, we don't know exactly how some of these technologies are going to emerge. And probably some of you have been to some of these amazing meetings here at the COP where we hear about new technologies and you sometimes come out of them and thinking, wow, maybe this is one of the ones that's going to save the world, right? You don't know. We don't know which ones, but if some of them become cost effective at large scale, they could revolutionize the green hydrogen industry. And then it will be really, really important that the renewable energy schemes in developing countries are well connected into the grids in order to provide electricity there. However, you're right, you still need storage, and you have to find the right way of having the storage as well if the renewable energy in that country is mainly intermittent. So it's a question of having flexibility in the system, but I also think that when there is a good market and a good on a basis with a sort of long-term contracts, then public-private partnerships, which can be facilitated by public development banks, is critical.
Thank you. And we have we have seen the benefits that green hydrogen can provide to developing countries. And you are actually doing a study to assess how policymakers intend and understand this potential impact under the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals, correct? So you know this, are developing countries looking at hydrogen considering the synergies for their development, or they're still looking at it only for its export opportunity?
Thank you very much for this very interesting question. I am happy here to tell about the study which we are conducting jointly with UNIDO on the impact of hydrogen and SDGs and how it's being reflected in national strategies. So just please let me tell briefly the background for methodological framework for this study. We use various methods of stakeholder participation and dialogue, but also we use data mining tools for sentiments and content analysis facilitated by AI, and as well cognitive fuzzy maps and causal loop diagrams. And our empirical data are national strategies and national strategic documents. We collected more than 60 different strategic documents, and as very rightly mentioned by Rita, more than 45 of them are national hydrogen strategies. The remaining are the roadmaps, strategic plans, which are frequently called also strategy. These documents are very different, so they vary from 2 pages to several pages in different languages. Some of them available publicly, some of them are not. And what we find out, so the first question for us was to address how actually the countries name hydrogen in their strategies. And we find out that 74% of them call it as green hydrogen, so they are calling for green hydrogen. 22% use so-called color neutral basis, so they speak about clean hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen, and 4% speak about blue hydrogen. Then we looked at how, for example, they connect hydrogen and SDGs. So first we evaluated and we found out that 20% of them mention SDGs and SDGs framework and SDG thinking in their strategies in regards to hydrogen. 24% look at some particular SDG targets. And more than half of them don't name SDGs, but you could actually understand it by the content and by several keywords and connect it to SDGs. If we look to particular SDGs and implementation, so only 1/4 has settled some kind of strategic plans or concrete actions for these SDGs. And what was also interesting for us is that actually majority, if they look at SDGs, then it's energy access and clean energy. And here we see big difference in studies in social science and in science in general. We also did content analysis there, and for scientific thinking, hydrogen is mainly climate security. So they speak about climate action, but in strategic documents it's mainly energy access, affordable energy, clean energy. So this comes as a big bubble with the keywords. The second one followed is climate action, and then industrial diversification, production, technology transfer, vertical and horizontal technology transfer, jobs creation process, and so on. There are some SDGs which are not mentioned in no one strategy, and this is life underwater and life on the ground, so which is probably understandable. And in general, if a country mentions SDGs, they mention 5 of them. But there are also several outliers. So we saw some strategies which want to reach all SDGs except these 2 ones. And our causal loop diagrams, when they show dependencies between these SDGs and the actions, priorities of actions, so here we see 2 big bubbles which stand out. The first one is regulation. So apparently it's targeted in several of the strategies and is priority. And the second one is issues with communities and local impact, on which we will talk about it.
Thank you. And it's not a problem if water is not mentioned. IRENA has just published a report about water for hydrogen, where we pointed out that green hydrogen is actually the most water-effective solutions to produce hydrogen. So I am sensitive about the time. We are on still 15 minutes. And I would like first to ask if the audience has any question for our panelists before I go ahead. Okay, we have Jazair. You can come. The microphone, unfortunately.
I think your microphone. Thank you very much. I am Jazair Daoudi from the Swedish Energy Agency. Great discussion. I have a question to you, Frank, right? If I were at the same room where was that the Namibia president had some issues with the CBAM, I would say that it's also very much related to the business models that these developing countries are applying. For example, we have heard about Oman, I think, some other countries. They are actually inviting businesses or companies from the developed countries to develop the plants for manufacturing hydrogen and e-fuels. So the technology will be there because they will be, at the end of the day, employing the workforce from the countries. So we should consider that as well. What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, no, I thank you for bringing up Oman, because I do think that they have actually, sort of find a way that is a good example for many people. So first of all, the government, so they established Hydrom, which is a dedicated hydrogen agency. Then they invite companies. There were a lot of unsolicited proposals, which many countries now have. But then they structured it. So they invited them. There is now the second auction live, and then their currency is the land. You know, it's the land that you have as a country, plus the resource, which is of course what is the promise for the future. And then they orchestrated it. So they also said we want to do common infrastructure. So the hydrogen pipelines, the water pipelines, the desalination system. We are going to do that, and then actually going to sell those, or at least make the companies that are going to build the hydrogen and ammonia and green steel stuff, they're going to use the common infrastructure, which is again orchestrated by the country. Also there they invited third-party investors. So Fluxys from Belgium is now a shareholder in the local pipeline company. So they're going to invest in that common infrastructure. So if you're smart about it, you attract the foreign investors, but you still retain ownership and you take charge and you keep that. I think that's important. Oman is also interesting because the clusters that they're developing, they're looking at green steel, they're looking at ammonia. They've already gotten again, also foreign off-takers for the green steel. But when you make green steel in the country, of course you can also keep that value in the country. And make other things from green steel and green ammonia. To your point about technology risk, I would like to add, yes, it's always a risk to make a choice, and who knows what is better in 10 years from now. But if you look at the basics, we will need electricity, we will need water. And then if you look at some of the products, ammonia is actually really interesting. First of all, it's a fertilizer. Everybody needs fertilizer. Sub-Saharan Africa, massively under-fertilized. You know, many countries, 5 to 15 kilos per hectare a year, not enough. You need at least 50, only South Africa has 50, United States 200. So there needs to be a lot more fertilizer to increase productivity. We can make that in those countries. You don't have to use foreign currency if you can use your renewable energy resource. Thing is affordability. So then again, you get back to, okay, who's going to pay for this? Because right now, they're not affording, they can't afford, many of the countries can't afford fertilizer because they have to buy it. You know, making it with current technology is not cheaper. That is the fact. So you still need some sort of a mechanism that, you know, some of that money comes from outside, otherwise it won't happen. But ammonia is interesting. You can store it relatively cost effectively, and you can use it for many things. You can make steel with ammonia, you can use it as a marine fuel, you can use it in industrial steam applications. There is even a Japanese company that's making glass with ammonia, so there's a lot of new applications that you can use ammonia with. So first of all, I think it's a sort of a safe bet in the sense that you can always use it for fertilizer, but then there is more and more applications for ammonia. So that was just what I wanted to add to your point about technology dependence and, you know, what better you make it.
Any other question from, oh, okay.
Hi, thank you so much first of all for the panel. I'm Mariam from Egypt. I currently work in Taka, Arabia, which is one of the developers for the green hydrogen project in the Suez Canal hub in Egypt. And one of the main challenges that we're facing as we're doing the feasibility study now is if we're considering e-methanol, it's the sourcing of the CO, of the biogenic carbon. We don't want to invest like millions of dollars and then in a few years not be able to export the product to Europe or for regulations. And we're wondering, and we are considering ammonia, e-methanol, and hydrogen for the feasibility. And specifically, we're finding this a huge challenge for the e-methanol. And we're just wondering if you, what do you think about that? Would you? Okay. Would you advise on investing in e-methanol? How do you see investors sourcing biogenic carbon in 5 years? How do we solve this challenge?
Yeah, I mean, that is a challenge. First of all, sourcing, you know, long-term, you know, clean carbon for your methanol, and then secondly, what's the long-term demand for it? It's not as straightforward as, for example, ammonia. I mean, again, getting back to it, if you look at, you know, Suez Canal, you want to be, let's say, the bunkering hub for the new maritime industry. You know, now most of the big, you know, shipping agents they have ordered methanol as a fuel or methanol vessels because it's just easier and quick to do. Right now, that's a drop-in fuel. Ammonia engines are currently being developed by Wärtsilä, MAN, and WindGD in Switzerland. So those are coming on the market, but they're not there yet. So it's a tough one, but you know, if it was my money, I'd rather go for ammonia than for methanol. But it's up to you.
Thank you. We have time for one extra question if there is anyone from the floor. Otherwise, I have a closing question from our panelists, and it's about social contracts. This is an emerging topic about green hydrogen. People that want to develop hydrogen realize that they need also to have public acceptance. We can't just, in particular in developing countries, but also in countries that have tradition of fossil fuel industry. So, however, the idea of the social contracts is still a bit nebulous. What actually is ontologically, physically, how they will materialize. So I just want to grasp your brain and understand, while this topic is still to be fully explored, what do you think are the main aspects that we have to consider when considering social contract and how to optimize the relationship between local population and hydrogen production for everyone?
So, one thing I would say about this is that when we look at the issue of a just transition, that probably the places where livelihoods are going to be lost from, you know, closing down of high emitting industries, and the places where you might make hydrogen are not going to be the same place. And that is where we come back to the role of the strategic plans and so on, and bringing, as I said at the beginning, the just transition angle in. Because, you know, you cannot, there are great opportunities, but they may not be in the same place for the same people. And so when you're thinking about a social contract, we have to look at how the just transition happens, where yes, you want to be creating opportunities and you want that wealth to be spread across, you know, multiple parts of the society and not just a few people, shall we say. But it may be that something else, an additional, needs to be done to support the regions or the cities or the industries where the jobs are being lost, because they may not be, and probably will not be, actually in the same place. So that's the thing I would say about the social contract side of it. But it's incredibly important, or we will end up with pushback for something which could be part of a real change in the economy, which gives huge opportunity to developing countries. But it has to be done in a way that addresses a just transition.
Thank you. Nadia first, maybe.
Thank you very much. Before I dive to the question on social contracts, I just would like to answer to your remark on the water. So water was actually mentioned as a part of the local impacts. What was not mentioned is life below the water, which is meaning oceans. But unfortunately, as we could see, and we do several decision-making experiments and several serious games, and we see that people usually prioritize economic criteria, safety criteria, environmental criteria. It, of course, depends how you formulate them, but they might end at the bottom of the rank. So going to the social contracts, we had several projects analyzing issues of public protests against infrastructure, energy transition infrastructure, started from the wind parks in Mexico, going to Central Asia, to solar and wind installations, to transmission facilities, and we see everywhere the same pattern, more or less the same pattern, which we call like the model of public acceptance, which we from our side put to confront the so-called NIMBY thinking, banana and all these methods which actually have discriminative approach to the community's acceptance. So we see several factors of this public acceptance. The first one is so-called distributive justice, is who is carrying the costs, benefits and risk of this installation. So what is required from the local community in terms of resources, of local resources. What is the information? Is information available? How it's being communicated? And here we find so-called participatory paradox when we look at the infrastructure setting and large-scale infrastructure setting. So if you communicate it too early, people don't believe that something is going to happen in local community. If you communicate it too late, then they say decision were taken without us, or we did not participate. Then there is so-called participatory justice, so it's how people are being involved in what part of decision-making processes. I speak about local communities. Did they participate in discussion about peculiarities of the project? In which way? So there are also here several methods to understand it, like, for example, Adolf-Einstein maps all these patterns of participation. And it's also important, what we understood while analyzing, for example, CSP projects in such countries as Morocco, it's important to follow with communities the whole way. So if you speak about compensations, if you speak about some certain funds for usage of the land, of resources, you should also help people with procedures and regulations, how they are able to apply from these funds, because sometimes they are left alone at this process, and further capacity building is also necessary here. And the last takeaway, which I would like to say here, that social contracts, it's also a part of social impact assessment, and it provides certainties to both sides. I saw it by several projects that it also would be a requirement of investor, because it's like a contract on both sides, and this would avoid the situation of public protests and then expensive issues on the ground.
Yeah, I think this is an important and not very well understood topic, but I think it's going to be of growing importance. But of course we know a number of things. First, let's talk about water. To make green hydrogen, you need water. Very often, the big projects that we're looking at are in desert areas where there is not a lot of water available, so you have to then desalinate, ship water in. The cost of the water on the hydrogen project is not very significant. So it's very easy if you're a government, you say, okay, you get a license or you get land, you're allowed to do this. To actually then mandate, make at least double the amount of water and make sure that everybody in the community gets, access to that water. It won't break the economics of the project, but it provides tremendous community benefit. Secondly, I think we need to also learn from, I used to work in Germany for a long time. Nobody likes a wind turbine unless it's theirs. So what happened was that you had a lot of, like small investment companies, they bought a piece of land, they built a number of wind turbines, and you could actually invest in them. And then what they did is they lowered the threshold because you wanted to have, you don't want to have 1,000 shareholders per wind turbine, it's a lot of administration. So you had a minimum amount of money for you to become an investor in the fund that owned the wind turbine. People that lived around it, so there was like a circle around it, if they're very close, the threshold was lower, so anybody could actually participate. And then all of a sudden that thing is yours. It's not somebody else's. You feel ownership. But I think that is something that we need to think about. In developing countries, perhaps affordability in hard cash is an issue. So maybe you find a way of sweat equity where people actually work and then they earn a little bit of shares in the company, but at least then you have ownership. Maybe that's a model to think about.
Great idea. Okay, so the clock is ticking. We have achieved the end of our session. I think that we have learned things today. We have learned that the agile discussion is moving ahead. It's moving toward understanding better the benefits that this career can bring, aside from, of course, the fight against climate change. We learn that there are impact that can be improved and impact that could be avoided with sound policy making. I want to thank again our colleagues in UNIDO and IDOS for making this report possible. It will be available online very soon. And a big round of applause for our panelists.